I believe trust usurps love, that it ranks higher. If you had to like rank the conditions that need to exist for relationships to thrive, to survive, to last, I just think trust ranks number one. I think people routinely end relationships with people they love all of the time.
Matthew Fray, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. Appreciate your time.
How did you end up being here talking about divorce?
In 2013, my marriage ended. And I don't want to say that I didn't see it coming, because there was an 18-month lead up to it where it was sort of like a slow decay and it was pretty awful. And we were in different bedrooms, but there still was nothing that had prepared me for the experience of my wife literally like moving out, packing a suitcase, taking her little boy. I always want to make sure that people don't imagine like an angry woman kidnapping our child. She very peacefully and promising me that I'd see him tomorrow or the next day, drove and said, I'm going to be at my mom's. Though that's what it was. I don't want to make it seem like she was a kidnapping our son. But she left, and it was brutal. And I had a really difficult time with it. We'd been together for 12 years, married for 9 of them. And I was 34 at the time, just about. And I don't know. I never had like a frame of reference for anything that sucked that bad before. That was that sort of awful. And that was it. It was my personal crisis. Everybody can only know what they know. Everybody can only have experienced whatever adversity or pain that they've experienced. And I don't want to make excuses for my relatively non-resilient, fragile life up to that point. But it was simply the most difficult thing I'd encountered. I hated it. And I had to get to work on figuring out what I'd done to contribute to it. I needed to selfishly protect my future self from having this happen again. And in that process, I believe I sort of evolved and came to some valuable insights and conclusions about ways in which I had a lot more power and influence in my relationship than I believed on the day she drove away, where I felt like a victim. And I don't feel like a victim anymore.
It's interesting that you talk about the exit being unceremonial, unspectacular. There wasn't someone threw a glass and then she stormed out and this, that, and the other. And I think you mentioned about how you think most relationships end with a whimper rather than a bang.
Yeah, I think that there is. I mean, I don't like to try to speak for everybody. I'll speak for me and trust that lots of people also thought and felt this way. Growing up, when marriages ended and I heard about it, I always assumed somebody had done something sort of overtly horrible. Sexual infidelity, physical abuse, crime, just major deceit, something really bad that we would all like sit around a table and agree, man, they definitely should have ended their marriage because of that awful thing that person did. And what I've come to believe in my work and in my personal life is that the great majority of relationships do not end that way, that they end from things that people want to fight about whether they should end over them. And those are conversations around somebody leaving a dish by the sink or a piece of laundry on the bedroom floor or the state of the bathroom when somebody walks into it, after somebody got ready and brushed their teeth in the morning. And these are the little things that are so easy to write off as benign, as inconsequential, as no big deal. And because one person cares about it, and because the other person insists that it's not a problem, it never gets repaired. The disharmony never heals, never gets repaired. And it's my strong belief that those pile up hundreds of times, thousands of times over the duration of a relationship. They erode trust in a way that I think of as like a paper cut each time. And that the accumulation of these paper cuts compromises the stability, the integrity of the relationship. And then, often it's something really overtly bad does happen. And I don't necessarily mean infidelity or something, but like an external trauma, like often the death of a loved one or sickness. Somebody gets diagnosed with like a really scary disease. And those break relationships in which the foundation of like safety and trust has been eroded.
The resiliency has already been damaged, and then something heavy enough comes in that can snap that.
That's what I believe the most common story in relationships are. But again, it's often not. It doesn't even require the big thing. It doesn't require the health diagnosis or the death in the family or anything like that. We can absolutely destroy relationships in these super slow ways. And finally, somebody has enough. Somebody has enough data points to say, this is going to happen forever. So I either have to voluntarily agree to stay in it or I have to leave. And I think, I hate to say this because so many people take it as if I'm blaming men. I'm not blaming men. I think most men are exceedingly decent people. I think they miscalculate for how much pain their partner experiences because of things they do or don't do that they're not even really aware of. So often I think men are sort of inadvertently putting their wives or girlfriends in a position in heteronormative relationships to make that decision. And it's a tough spot for people to be.
Yeah, it's the blame game, which kind of is very common on the internet, is something that I really try to steer out of a lot. The sort of manosphere / red pill, and then the kind of whatever most recent wave of feminism / women going their own way movement. Both of these they have kernels of truth in them, but the problem is that they look at the problem through a low resolution viewpoint, right? It's all women are X or all men are X, or this is the way to deal with the situation. Nobody should get married because it's a complete waste of time. The entire institution of marriage is skewed against men, or you need to be completely, never open yourself up to men because men are going to be this sort of abusing force. And you go, okay, like, look, to me, that doesn't seem like it moves us any closer to a useful outcome. And I think that one of the fundamental things I learned from David Buss, who's an evolutionary psychologist, one of the fathers of evolutionary psychology, is that there are different ways that men and women can interpret the same situation. And this isn't something conscious, right? There's an overestimation and an underestimation bias when it comes to attraction. So you can have the same interaction go from a man to a woman and a woman to a man. They're both experiencing the same thing. In terms of self-report afterwards, the man presumes that the woman was way more interested in him than she was, and the woman presumes that the man was way less interested in her than he was. And you can scale this out replicably. It's been done at speed dating competitions, so on and so forth. That's kind of like a funny, relatively harmless example. But roll that clock forward, that kind of starts to explain how the boss might have seen the receptionist as actually her eyes have lingered on him a little bit too long, and then that signal begins to get confused. She thought she was being polite. He thought she was being sort of flirty. And you go, okay, so who's in the wrong here? And you go, well, kind of not really anybody, because both people acted on the situation that they saw, right? And this is what we're talking about, how I'm inferring that you're talking about the symbolic significance of leaving glasses on the sink, that to one person, the language of leaving glasses on the sink doesn't mean anything at all. And to another person, how they interpret that situation is it's a really, really big deal. And understanding that men and women see the same situations in different ways is just such a great hack for dissolving conflict. Because what we presume is, hang on, this upset me. How can you not see that this would upset you too? Well, it's like, because I'm not seeing the same thing that you're seeing.
Yes. Yeah, I posit that at the root of trust erosion in relationships is one person saying, hey, this upsets me or hurts me on some level, and the other person indicating that they shouldn't think or feel the thing that they do. Essentially saying, that shouldn't matter to you. That shouldn't be as painful or as important as you're making it out to be. And when it's something that I did or didn't do, I just believe over time our partner doesn't trust us anymore. I liken this scenario to the analogy or the metaphor that I use in the book is the idea of the field of optometry back in the 1700s. We hadn't scientifically proven color blindness yet. So it's conceivable that two people, one person with color correct vision, one person with color blindness, could be standing there having a very honest debate about the color of a painting or a bushel of vegetables or a field of flowers. And both would be telling the whole truth. But you can just sort of in your own mind, see how these two people could come to, fight and call each other names and have an enormous amount of conflict, because you'd believe that this person has to be intentionally screwing with you in order to have arrived at this conclusion. And it's, feels deeply insulting to say that thing's orange when I know it's green. I know it's green. I see it right now. It's there. And it's funny, right? Because there's all sorts of funny little things on the internet where people hear different things or they see a different color. And there's been sort of famous examples of that in the last, 10 years in pop culture. But I like to imagine the optometry fairy, this Wizard of Oz, like Good Witch of the North, shows up out of the sky and like hands the people the glasses that would allow them to see the color that the other person saw. Or hell, just be there for optometrists being able to verify, in whatever scientific method they use to verify it, that people literally see different colors. Because nobody had a frame of reference for that possibility. And I essentially think that's what we're talking about in relationships. I do think it manifests as like men do this, women do that a lot. I think there are examples where it's not always that way. So I try not to like exclude people. I try really hard not to say men are always like doing, saying, thinking, feeling this, and women are doing the opposite.
Everything should be caveated with on average beforehand.
Sir. Absolutely. And that's how I think about it. It's sort of like statistically observably true most of the time. And
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, that's just like how I think about it. And I think it's really important. That is the idea that started me on this path. It was that framework, was that there other humans literally see and think and feel different things. And that sounds so ridiculous to emotionally intelligent, naturally empathetic people. But when you're me, where I'm from, that is a foreign concept. That another person could describe something 100% differently than me, and both could be true.
And still be telling the truth.
Yeah, is not something that I understood.
How have you come to see the relationship between trust and love?
I believe in the context of a romantic relationship that a lot of people think love is the end all be all, is the thing that you need, that if you have enough love in place, everything's going to be okay. And I don't believe that. I believe trust usurps love, that it ranks higher. If you had to like rank the conditions that need to exist for relationships to thrive, to survive, to last, I just think trust ranks number one. I think people routinely end relationships with people they love all of the time.
Because of a lack of trust.
Yeah, yes. And again, and it's not, and I think a lot of people hear that word trust and they think, well, gee, I don't lie. I don't cheat. I'm a reliable person that goes to work and makes money and comes home and I don't gamble it away. What are they talking about? And it shows up in these really nuanced, subtle conversations where one person sees orange, the other person sees green. They're like, I see this differently than you. More importantly,
give us an example of that.
Well, okay, so my most famous example is the dish by the sink. And I insisted that it was ridiculous for my wife to make a big deal out of a dish laying by the sink. Essentially, and I don't want to, a lot of people think this is a literal conversation about dishes and that I was some slob and that she had to pick up after me all the time. And that's not true. It was a drinking glass that I put water in so I could take like vitamins and stuff in the morning. And so I'd set it there just because it felt like an efficient way to go about it. And I didn't think it was this, I just thought it was ridiculous that she like kept like sort of like getting on me about it. The thing that hurts is not the dish being there. It's not. The thing that hurts is when somebody feels as if you've promised to love and care for them and be their adult partner always, and you simply have no respect and do not value what they think, what they feel, what their experiences are. The dish communicates, I'm going to choose me, my beliefs, and my feelings, my wants, my needs. I'm going to choose them over you every time our experiences don't align with one another. Every time I don't agree with the thing you're asking for, the thing that you want, the thing that you wish I'd do different. If I don't approve of the message, if I don't concur, I'm going to do what I want, even at the expense of what you think, of what you feel. And I think that you can get away with that hundreds of times probably. But I believe these are the subtle paper cut moments that destroy trust, intimacy, and relationships. And finally, a person says to themselves, okay, let me just make it about my marriage. My wife finally learned that if I didn't agree with whatever she believed or whatever she felt, that I was always going to choose me over her. And that's where the trust like goes away. It's not trust in terms of honesty. It's trust in terms of reliability, sustainability, consistency. It is, I don't trust this relationship's going to last, or even if the relationship does last, I calculate it's going to be even worse for me down the road than it is today. And that's a dangerous place to put people in. People that have a healthy amount of self-respect and self-love will exit a relationship in which they predict a year from now is going to be worse than today. 5 years from now is going to be worse than today. Anyway, and I think we inadvertently put people in that situation a lot.
What about the archetype of the person who knows that the relationship is already doomed to fail, but then doesn't have the bravery to leave? That seems to be a very, very common situation that I see.
Yeah, no, fair enough. The one I imagine, and I'd love to hear different ones that you imagine. The one I imagine when you say that is, and this is pretty stereotypical, is because 7 out of 10, at least in the United States, 7 out of 10 divorces are filed by women. So statistically, women are being fed up, in my estimation, because of these sort of like subtle moments of trust erosion. And eventually they work up the courage to file for divorce. But there might be a number of months or years prior to that decision, right, where they held on. And I'm pretty generous about it. I think it's usually I'm staying together for my children. I'm staying together. It could be fear-based. I'm staying together because I don't know what his reaction's going to be.
And I think, for me, one of the ones that I would definitely see in the modern world, financial reliance. It's increasingly difficult to be a single person supporting a household, potentially with kids or without kids, sticking together for the children, sticking together because of a fear of what comes next. I don't have the support structure that I should do. We've got a world which is connected more than ever before and yet more isolated than it's ever been as well. So people, you can't go and live with your Facebook friend. And right. You're probably right. When we're talking about this, given the fact that 7 out of 10 divorces are instigated by women, if we're talking about somebody that kind of knows the relationship should end and doesn't, on average, that's probably going to be women as well. And I'd be really interested for the women that are watching to throw it in the comments below or do whatever, because, if you've stuck about in a relationship, I'd be very interested to work out what compelled you to stay and what didn't compel you to go. But one of the interesting things that I quite like that you come up with is that even good people can be bad spouses. Yeah. And that's such a lovely way to frame it. And it also highlights the fact that this is why I think a lot of the men in some of the sort of manosphere movements feel particularly embittered because they didn't do anything wrong in their vision, right? They got up, they went to work, they didn't cheat on their wife, they came home, they tried to pay the mortgage, they tried to be a this, that, and the other, and yet it still didn't work. And yet there was maybe the paper cut syndrome, the glasses left on the side, the lack of validation, the lack of sense of belonging that was needed to keep this going. And that sucks, man. Like, that's hard for me to hear men Absolutely. Going through a situation where they were doing all of the things that men were told that they were supposed to do. You're supposed to work hard, be right by your woman, da, 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 da. And then there's like this, I don't know, translation error that's occurred, which has meant that men are now, the good man still wasn't a good husband somehow. And squaring that circle, it's tough. And it's tough for the woman as well, I think that a lot of women are probably pretty empathetic, and they know, look, this is a man who's working. This is a man who's trying to provide for me. And yet, slowly over time, the way that I feel about him just isn't working, and there isn't anything. He didn't cheat on me. He didn't abuse me. He didn't spend all of the money down at the casino and then tell me that it was on something else. It is this whimper, not a bang. And this is, I don't know, it's such a bourgeois, luxurious way to do something catastrophic. Does that make sense? Like, it's so comfortable, it's so convenient, and yet it's completely atrocious and painful.
I wish I could prove this with data. I really believe it's the most common story of relationships that end. And I hope that that's a hopeful message. What I'm trying to do when I say good people can be bad spouses, can be bad partners, I'm trying to disassociate character from like the behavior. I don't think the harm that's caused in relationships is a result of anybody with ill character or ill intention. And what I really would hope guys will learn to do collectively is stop with the defensive responses. Defensiveness is inherently invalidating. And when somebody says, I hurt, and then we make it about us, we make it about our good intentions, the person's pain never gets repaired. Trust never gets restored. And I know it might seem like a minor, inconsequential moment. And I know a lot of these guys might say, well, what about my pain? What about my mistrust? It's my belief that we're the first domino to fall most of the time. I will defend every guy in the world in which I don't believe he's the first domino to fall. A man inadvertently does something, he thoughtlessly, not, and I don't mean thoughtlessly like carelessly. I mean, it doesn't even occur to him because he's trying to do what he perceives to be his role in his relationship, in his family, doing the right thing, often as a provider. Often it's like, I'm a provider and I will not cause harm, is more or less like the two pillars on which he leans. And he's always believed that would be enough. And he had every reason to believe so based on the feedback of this person that said, I do, and that I want to be with you for the rest of my life. And then he goes and does it. But then, right, while he's like not paying attention, in his blind spots, these little sort of pain points are occurring, these little teeny tiny moments, and they don't get repaired. And when they pile up over the course of 5, 10, 15, 20 years, the other person feels so hurt by this idea that I can't trust this person to behave in a way where the math result of their behavior isn't painful for me. And even worse, if I try to say something to him about, if I try to recruit him to help like the painful thing stop, he gets really defensive, or he implies that I'm wrong, that I'm crazy, that I'm stupid, that I'm weak, that I'm hypersensitive, that I'm too emotional, because he doesn't know how to see the orange thing that I see as green, or whatever, you know what I mean? And I just think that's a really tragic story. I really do. And I just think we need to learn how to value the idea of repair and safety and trust in our relationships. Even if the other person is saying something we don't calculate to be dangerous, to be harmful. That's like the great lesson. Doesn't matter what our beliefs are. It doesn't matter what our intentions are. The math result of things that happen in this world or things that we do absolutely can still result in pain for other people. And we can deny that if we want. I just posit you won't have healthy relationships with those people that feel pain. Feel free to disagree with other people if you don't approve of the pain that they're claiming to feel. I think if we want to have healthy relationships, we absolutely have to acknowledge that person's suffering, even if it seems really small, even if it's presenting like really small, like a dish by the sink or a conversation about laundry. And the people that learn how to see that and to acknowledge that and to repair this teeny tiny moment and not allow them to accumulate, I believe they'll never have the trust erosion. They'll never do the fallout of love thing.
You talk about invalidation and consideration as two pillar habits that people need. Yeah. Dig into that for me.
All right. So I think the low-hanging fruit of things that we do in our relationship, the easiest thing to practice doing habitually, like mechanically, to make things better is to learn how to validate instead of invalidate. And a lot of guys think that they hear that I'm advocating for agreeing with your relationship partner no matter what. And I promise I'm not doing that. And so what that looked like in my marriage, there's the three distinct ways. I refer to it as the invalidation triple threat, this idea that there are three specific ways we invalidate somebody, even if our intention is not to invalidate them. I think we think of it as disagreeing, honestly, and that we should be allowed as adults to disagree with other people. And I think we can get away with this with virtually everybody in our world. I think it will destroy trust and intimacy with our romantic partners and probably with our children too. My wife would come in the room and she'd say, hey, Matt, this bad thing happened. I feel bad about it. And version one of this invalidation triple threat was I disagreed intellectually with what my wife is saying happened. She'd tell some story and how it made her feel bad. And I'd be like, that's not even what happened. This is what happened. So version one is I correct the mental, intellectual experience she had. Version two, wife walks in the room, says, hey, this thing happened. I feel bad about it. And this time I'm fully on board that the event happened exactly as she says it did. But now I'm like, but why are you feeling that way about it? Why are you allowing that to affect you that much? A more normal or fair or appropriate reaction to that incident is to feel this way about it. And I try to correct her feelings this time instead of whatever she thought. And then version three is just defensiveness. Hey, Matt, this happened. I feel bad. And I'm like, wait a minute. Let me explain. Let me just try to explain to you what I was doing. And I feel like once you understand, you won't be mad at me anymore. You won't feel like I did anything to cause harm. And I just believe that the math result of those three patterns, those three habitual responses that I think are patterns in relationships, the other person never gets told, I understand that this situation affected you, even if it didn't affect me. And you can trust me to like do something about it moving forward. You can trust me to cooperate, that if it's something that I have the ability to influence, that I'm going to do it differently moving forward. Because I would never allow you to feel hurt just because I was too comfortable to like change my ways. And that's the thing, is I don't think any of these guys would do that. I don't think any of these guys would truly know that the wife, girlfriend, whoever they love, hurts in a measurable way and say, I'm too comfortable to do things differently. They literally don't believe that the scenario is as painful as they say. So a lot of guys are like, so what do you want from me? You want me to agree with her? I'm like, no, let's go through this thought exercise. And I love it when people are fathers because they identify with this really easily. I'm like, let's please imagine a small child being afraid of a monster hiding under their bed. So I imagine my son, he's 13 now, but he used to be 4. And he was a threat when he was 4 to wake up, crying hysterically because he was afraid of a monster under his bed. This didn't literally happen, but it could have absolutely happened any day. And this does happen in lots of families. And we as dad can run up to that room, open the door, survey the scene, find out he's upset because he thinks there's a monster under the bed. And I think the easiest, most logical way to try to solve that problem is to convince him he's mistaken about the presence of the monster. It's what I used to do. Dude, there's no monster under the bed. The reason you're crying isn't even real. You know, you're overreacting right now. You don't need to cry this much. Everything's fine. And I might say something thoughtless like, go to sleep. You're fine. Your bedroom's safe. And if I'm not being my best self and I want to go watch sports on TV or go back to sleep if it's the middle of the night, go to sleep. I don't have time for invisible monsters right now, and I might leave. I think there's some really important ideas here. One, I'm right. In this scenario, there isn't a monster there. I'm correct. So I think logic and reason are on my side. And I think that's where a lot of guys land in these conversations, this belief that they're the logical or the reasonable ones. I think there's a real danger in leaning on logic and reason in the context of trust and relationships. Also, fact 2 and 3 that I can't prove, but I hope you'll believe, I love my son intensely. He's my favorite person on earth. And I would never behave in a manner designed to inflict harm. I would never intentionally do something to her. And I think almost every husband in world history that truly loves his wife would say that same thing about his relationship partner. I love her. I'm right about this. And I would never intentionally do something to hurt her. So I'm just saying there's no monster under the bed. Like, relax. What's the math result of that situation, though? As the dad of this kid, my son is still afraid of the monster. He still feels fear. Whether he believes there's still a monster there or not is sort of irrelevant. He's afraid. He's still crying. But now he's abandoned, alone in the dark. Dad just implied he was dumb. He was crazy. He was weak. He wasn't good enough. He wasn't behaving the right way when he's afraid of a monster under the bed. And now what I'm saying is not that he's right and I'm wrong or vice versa. I'm saying my relationship just took a hit. My relationship suffered. And I don't think that kid, if that's how I always show up, when he's suffering on some level, when he feels bad about something, whether it's fear or anger or sadness or whatever, and that's always how I respond to him, it's not as bad as you're making it out, son. Toughen up. Everything's going to be okay. I don't think I'm going to get to have a healthy relationship with him after 3 years, after 5 years, after 10 years. So this is a choice. And so what's the alternative look like? I think it's I go in that bedroom, I hug my son, I say, buddy, I don't think there's a monster under the bed, but I'm really sorry that you're afraid right now. I mean, remember, we're talking to a 4-year-old in this instance. I'm really sorry that you're afraid right now. Let's turn a light on. Let's make sure there's no monster under the bed. And I think the great lesson, and the one that applies most symbiotically or whatever with our adult relationships, is the final idea. It's, son, whenever you're afraid, whenever you're hurt, whenever you're sad, whenever something's wrong, I want you to know you can always call mom, you can always call dad, and we're going to show up for you. We might not be able to fix what's wrong. We might not be able to solve your problem for you, but you never have to feel like you're the only one alone, like dealing with this by yourself, suffering in this way. We're always going to be by your side during life's crappy moments. And I think that's a profoundly simple yet powerful idea that we don't communicate to our adult relationship partners when we paper cut them with arguments about dishes and laundry and the state of the restroom and all sorts of things. Like, I can't even begin to calculate for all the little fights different couples have with one another. But I think it's more or less the equivalent of there's no monster under the bed, so you shouldn't be afraid and you shouldn't be this upset with me. It's not useful who's correct or incorrect. It's not. What's useful is responding to somebody in pain in a manner that restores trust, that increases intimacy, that increases safety. And if we can apply that monster under the bed principle and think about wanting to have good relationships with our children, and we can apply that same idea to our adult romantic relationships, I think we can practice a habit of responding to people in a way that's useful for relationship health instead of a way that's inadvertently not useful. Sorry, that was so long.
There's a guy, Adam Lane Smith, psychotherapist from the Midwest, and I had him on the show last year, and he was talking about how male depression and female depression both get treated like female depression. So female depression, the way that that's supposed to be fixed is by women being made to feel safe and comfortable and like they belong and like they're loved. And male depression gets treated the same way. But that's not what men want. They don't want that sensation. What they want is to feel like they have a purpose and the ability to achieve it. And this is borne out in the way that men and women bond as well. So women bond through oxytocin, right? You have sex. That's the hormone that's released heavily for women. And it is for men too, but that's not one of the primary bonding drugs. For them, it's vasopressin. And vasopressin is released when there is a challenge to overcome, and that men can overcome it as well. And you see this get borne out in, the meme about women like people and men like things. Like women are interested in people and men are interested in things. So with all of this, one of the conversations, and for women that are listening as well, like think about how he sees the situation. The immediate knee-jerk response is going to be to try and apply some sort of rational logic to the situation, to highlight the hypocrisy or the irrationality or the illogical nature of whatever it is that's coming up. And for the men, you need to think, look, it's not even about that. It's not about, you can't fix this feeling problem with things logic. What you need to do is say, look, I understand, I hear you, I am here, you're validated, I'm listening. Now let's slowly step you through this. And then if the reverse happens with a man, making him feel like he's safe and loved and belongs, that might not be the best approach. Perhaps to stress test some of the things that he's got going on, to hear him, to validate him, but then to step through bit by bit with some logic. And again, this is, women need to speak men's language and men need to speak women's language in order to continue to move forward. It's interesting to me as well, the way that your marriage actually ended. I think that story is probably pretty useful for people to hear. Can you go through that?
You might need to provide some clarity about exactly what you're asking.
The situation, was it her dad who'd passed?
Thank you. No, you took me back the right way. I appreciate it. Yeah, approximately 18 months prior to our marriage ending. I should go back a little further than that. I don't remember the timeline exactly, but we lost my father-in-law, my wife's father, out of nowhere, completely unexpectedly. We'd had dinner with him the night before, and the family, they were watching our son, was with his grandparents. He was only maybe 2 years old at the time. And so the five of us, the grandparents and my wife and I and our son in a high chair, were having dinner, and it was great. And then the very next night, I come home and I get a call from her cousin saying, he had a heart attack and he's gone. And I'm like, oh my God. So I have to go drop this news to her. And then the world was insane for several months, because you're dealing with sort of the grief and the shock and the loss. And then there's all these sort of logistics things that you have to do. I mean, we had to move her mother, somewhere else. And my wife at the time was responsible for that. She was the manager of trying to clean out and sell the home that she grew up in, that she was born and raised in, and that we still went to on weekends and things like that. And that had to go away. There's so many layers of sort of trauma and grief and loss that she was experiencing, while also trying to be a good daughter to her mother, while also trying to raise our son. And here she is, married to a guy where every time she's requested that something be done to alleviate her of some level of pain, or to honor some pain point for her that was designed to say, I'm respected, I'm safe, I'm loved because of this thing he's doing, I didn't do it for the better part of a decade. And I just think when a person is put in that situation, that's the outside trauma that breaks the relationship. At least it was for us. She told me at dinner one night, I'm not sure I love you anymore. I'm not sure I want to be married anymore. And I pouted and took it really hard. And I moved into the guest room because I thought she was being unfair. I thought she was betraying me. I thought she was implying that she might be, thinking about quitting on our marriage. And I thought, I hadn't done anything wrong. So you get you get it together. I'm going to go in the guest room And once you straighten up and figure out what you want, you come tell me about it. And 18 months later, she packed a suitcase and left. That was just the 18 most miserable months of my life where nothing positive happened in any way. And it's exactly the most wrong approach about anything that I've ever done.
How does it feel to have your life direction upended so much from where you were expecting to go?
Well, I actually think, other than the literal loss of the two humans that, once lived with me every day, there's a real shock when people just disappear, when they go away. I used to talk about how loud the silence could be, how loud a house that used to be full of life just felt so still and empty. It's really shocking and really unnerving. But I think that's a really powerful question that you just asked. I felt like divorce had robbed me of my past, meaning I'd wasted 12 years of my life in a relationship that was now gone. And it's like the thought process at the time is, well, hell, if I knew then what I know now, I would have invested in a different relationship and I wouldn't have wasted all this time, all these years. But I think maybe the most significant loss, aside from the physical, aside from the literal humans, is this notion of like, what's tomorrow going to be like? What's next year, 5 years, 10 years from now? Every single thought I'd ever had, every daydream about imagining the future involved my family, involved she and I being old together on a front porch or whatever, watching grandkids run around potentially. Who knows what it would be? It's sort of not relevant what it was. What was relevant was the idea that it takes all of that away. Everything gets taken away. At least I think people who really truly value this idea of their marriage and or their family being intact. And it was a tremendous loss for me. I don't want to whine about it and act like other people don't have greater traumas and greater losses. They certainly do. But for me, in a relativism way, it was the worst thing that I've ever known. And I think for a lot of people, it's the worst thing they ever know. And I think it's really tragic that the reason they get there is through a series of things they're not even paying attention to.
What did the process of reintegration into a somewhat normal life look like over the period after the divorce?
I was just drinking for a while to try to numb it all. And I'd never talked to a therapist in my life. I was sort of somebody that was like anti-therapy. I thought that was something like weak or crazy people did. I was a special guy. Like I needed a lot of help and didn't know it. And I called this therapist on a 1-800 number, half crocked on vodka. And she's like, she said, Matt, you should write this stuff. You should write your feelings. And I'm like, okay. And she obviously meant journal, like an adult. But instead, I just put it on the internet. And I didn't think anybody would read it. But once the feedback started rolling in, I got really serious about not being like, I got really serious about not wanting to just be another jerk off on the internet, bad mouthing marriage and my ex-wife. And I needed, if I was going to literally have an audience that was paying attention to me, I wasn't going to take that lightly. I was going to be committed to trying to do something positive, do something meaningful. So finally I started writing what I perceived to be vulnerable stories about like the true process I was going through mentally, emotionally, as I tried to assemble the story of my marriage, because the one I believed was obviously not true. Or at least my wife's version of the marriage, I didn't understand. I needed to understand something because I needed to protect myself from having this happen again. I was so afraid I would end up another 12, 15 years from now and the same thing would happen again. I was like absolutely terrified that could happen. So I needed to get it. It was, call it an insurance policy. And it was extremely empowering to discover that all along I could have made radically different choices. They would have been subtle though. To me, they weren't obvious, but they were radically different that I think would have had like significantly different outcomes for the relationship. And that's essentially what my work's based on today, is trying to help people identify these little everyday moments that they don't think are a very big deal. I frankly think are informing the direction of the relationship, and they maybe just don't hurt enough to realize it yet.
You say that feeling respected by one's wife is essential to living a purposeful and meaningful life. How is respect built up over time if you're a man that wants to be respected? how do you do that? Is it given? Is it earned?
I mean, I certainly thought I was entitled to it. In the men do this, women do this often dichotomy, as we've talked about, right? There's this idea of women wanting to be seen and heard and understood and cared for, and the quote unquote man side of the equation is this idea of having purpose and respect. And I'm glad you talked about this idea of what did you say? A challenge to overcome. This idea of having something to achieve, I think, is really important. I think maybe men believe what I believed. That I don't know that I can answer this in the spirit of the way that you're asking it. I believed I was entitled to respect because I never associated these so-called little things in relationships with the idea of being respected. They would have never ever been connected. I thought she was wrong.
Yeah,
to
it would have
elevate a dish by the sink, right, to a marriage problem.
I have a job, I'm working hard, I'm being loyal, I'm doing the things. Like, that's what you're told that respect comes from. Yeah, it seems like, the common arc that we're finding here is the big things are still the big things, but the little things can also be the big things too. And, you need to, as a man, cover that base if you want to ensure that your partner's going to feel happy and that you're going to continue to be respected. And I understand, man, like, I get why there is a culture on the internet of men that feel like, well, look, women's standards are just ridiculous. Like, why is it that I should have to do all of these things in order for me to just get the basic human like value of respect, right? And you think, yeah, well, fair enough, man. Like, maybe that's a really good question that I don't particularly have an answer to, but these are the rules of the game. You go, well, why should I have to change my behavior? Why can't she change hers? And he goes, well, maybe she is. Maybe there already are concessions that, as two people with penises, we can't really like dip into working out how that happens. But I'm sure that there are lots and lots of things that women do as well that they have to make concessions on. And I do understand. I understand why it feels hard for men. And then you also see this 7 out of 10 divorces are instigated by women thing. And then you hear these stories about, oh, well, because you've got an international dating market that's facilitated by Tinder and OnlyFans and Instagram, it means that what women are doing is they're finding the beta and then moving on to the alpha and doing all this sort of stuff. I simply haven't had that experience reflected in the real world. Like, I understand that there are men out there who have had traumatic situations with women that have used them, that have left them for people that were able to offer them more resources or status or wealth or comfort or whatever it was that they wanted, validation in life. I haven't seen that with the women that are going out with the friends that I have around me, with the women that I've been out with. It simply doesn't map onto my experience, and I that gives me hope. And unfortunately, it sounds like I don't know. It's like a rich kid saying, "Don't worry about money," because I haven't encountered this problem, and I don't disagree that other people have. But my point is that there are tons and tons and tons of very healthy, very well balanced, very lovely women out there that would make fantastic wives, and the same goes for men. And this is. I've had so many of these conversations recently, man, like, imbalances in the dating market, the evolutionary psychology that underpins why increasing female achievement with status and resources and education is making it ever more difficult for them to find men that they're fundamentally attracted to. Like, this is, the most interesting dynamic that I've discovered probably over the last year. And like the real core of what I'm trying to get to is, look, this is a ancestrally, limbically, psychologically, evolutionarily, psychographically novel situation for us to be in. It is a new type of environment for everybody to be in. And yeah, maybe it sucks more for some people than it does for others. But like, this toothpaste isn't going back in the tube. Like, we're not undoing women outperforming men in college. Like, what are you going to do? They've just got equality. Well, you can take it away from them? And then, like, what politicians running on that? Like, women, we're going to put you back in the kitchen to make your relationships better. And then on the flip side of that, you go, well, Why is it that men are the ones that seem to be suffering in this? You know, women are kind of wistfully chasing after the guys that are across and above hypergamously, and men are the sexless underclass that don't get to have any attention at the bottom. You know, you look at the stats on Tinder where the bottom 80% of men compete for the bottom 20% of women, and the top 80% of women compete for the top 20% of men. And you go, well, look, if you're in the bottom 80% of men, which almost all men are, because it's the bottom 80%, how's that fair? And you go, well, it's not. I understand that it's not. Well, why can't women fix their hypergamy? And you go, well, dude, why can't I fly? You know, why am I afraid of heights? You know, all of these things. Like, there are certain parts of our biology which are maladapted to a modern environment. And this, for better or for worse, right now is the situation that we're in. And I think that the message I'm really, really trying to get across to people is that a hopeful view of relationships is going to be the best thing that you can do, because there's an easy cope here, right? Like, the cope is modern relationships and modern dating is completely fucked. I don't need to invest my time in finding a woman because fundamentally they're only bothered about being gold diggers or blah, 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 whatever. And you go, well, dude, like, don't get me wrong. You're probably not going to get hurt. Like, congratulations, right? You've won the game of insulating yourself from the entire world outside. Congratulations. Well done. Maybe for some people that genuinely is a better option. But that inner citadel that they're retreating to, I don't know, like, you've got what, fucking 80 years on this planet? Is that really how you're going to progress through the rest of your days, with this defeatist mentality, especially from men that often talk about, you know, like, overcoming adversity, not being a victim, taking on that sort of victor ideal. And you go, well, look, like, what would the victor do? He'd shoulder a burden, you know, he'd pick up a weight and carry it. And I really, really want to try and have a hopeful view of relationships for people. Yes, modern dating's difficult. Yes, divorces can suck. But dude, like, what else are you going to do with your time? What else are you going to do? Really retreat into this citadel again? No. Like, that's what I want people to take away. Like, look, there is hope, and there are principles. I'm adamant that almost everybody is like one or two principles away from a radically different life, right? If you'd known two principles from the stuff, maybe not all of them, but just a couple of them, you would have a radically different life. And so would pretty much everybody else. And that's the goal of, as far as I can see, sort of this modern insight, sense-making, wisdom-based communication stuff is like, look, where's the pitfalls? How do I avoid them? Where's the successes? How do I expedite getting towards them? And whether that be blending your finances in the right way. We had this amazing guy on doing data-driven tactics for accumulating wealth and stuff. Like, okay, should I max my 401k or should I put it all into the S&P or whatever, right? Like, there's a principle, right? You just learn the principle, or the principle about communicating with your spouse, or the principle about why you should go sober 30 days out of every year, or whatever it is. Just picking up those principles over time. But yeah, the principle about being hopeful around dating is one that I hope people take on board.
I think so too. I really do. I want to address a couple of the things that you said that I think are really important. You talked about the idea of men saying, you know, why don't women need to change? Why does it have to be on me? The thing that I would ask for a smidge of compassion on the man side about is frequently pain is being experienced by the other person. And pain is not being experienced. You're frustrated. You're angry. It sucks. It's inconvenient. But pain is being experienced on the other side, I think, in the common heteronormative male-female relationship. And I think that's the chasm between why do we need to change? Because I don't think we should hurt people that we promise to love. I think that's bad, even if we don't mean to. I think we should accept responsibility for doing things differently so that the math result of our behavior isn't pain. And then on the side of like the dating marketplace, I don't know. I'm in favor of two ideas. One, accept responsibility for partner selection. I'm so sorry for guys that have felt conned or duped or misled, victims of cheaters and liars. And I don't mean to like hold us up to some grand standard that these guys are like somehow too dumb to have like been able to avoid. But I've never been in a relationship, even a short little dating relationship, with somebody that I felt conned by, ever. I believe strongly I can avoid. I know how to ask questions and discern whether somebody is sort of an awful, evil person or not. I'm aware there are anomalies out there, but I want to be responsible for partner selection. I just think it's really, really important. I'm not, and then so right, I'm not going to hurt somebody and then be mad at them that they don't want to be with me anymore. And if somebody does something awful to me, well, at the end of the day, it's still on me because I chose them. And I really wish people would. It's just empowering. I just think a victim mentality is really dangerous. To believe that we don't have any control over what happens is really dangerous. We have an enormous amount of influence. Be somebody that people want to be with. And I understand that there are resources and genetics and all sorts of things that factor into this. But at the end of the day, I want the math result of my behavior to be attractive or at minimum not unattractive, not something that so I meet somebody. I don't want them 5 years from now to not want to be with me anymore because of the math of my behavior. And that's how I think about it. And maybe people think that that's a ridiculous idea, but I don't believe I've ever met anybody that would trick me, would keep me on the line for 5 years. I believe I push them away because of things I do or don't do. And I think that's the healthy way to think about it.
Taking responsibility in that way seems to be, I don't know, it's just the more hopeful way of looking at relationships. So I had the director of behavioral science at Hinge on the show a couple of weeks ago, a lady called Logan Urie's just written a new book, How Not to Die Alone. And she said she had some really interesting insights about, she called it intentional dating. And there's something still icky about that, right? That men that take how to date courses, like both from men and women, that it's a little bit like, well, hang on, is this not supposed to be like emergent and natural and part of your sort of male charisma, like the musk that comes out of you? It's just supposed to exude from you normally. And there's something, I think previously, might be slowly being degraded now, that felt, it was presumed to be a little bit icky somehow, that this felt not manipulative, but deficient in some way, right? That it was highlighting the fact that this man wasn't enough as he was, so therefore he would need to become more. When it's very sort of, I think there's something about the fact it's only one step away from a narcissist who's sort of playing the game, but not loving the game, so to speak. He's not invested in the game, but he's just learning. You know, the pickup artist sort of community of the early 2000s kind of laid the foundations for this. But being deliberate and intentional about the way that you date. We're deliberate and intentional about everything else. Everybody that's listening to the show is deliberate and intentional about the time that they go to bed, and about the macros that they eat during the day, and about their hydration, and about their training, and the people that they spend time around, and the type of Breville sandwich maker that they use, and what note-taking app they decide that they're going to optimize their Kindle highlights with. And then you get to something like dating, and you're like, oh, well, we'll just leave it up to Mother Nature. And you think, well, maybe not. Maybe there is a degree of where you could be over-intentional and kind of so deliberate that all of the love and presence and grace gets taken out of stuff. But definitely with this, one or two principles away from something really important happening. One of the things that I thought was really, really interesting that I wanted to discuss was that you talked about how, having not been with your wife for quite a while and not being intimate with her for a long time, even before that there was an extra level of existential pain to think about another man touching her. And this is something that I think is very, very difficult for men to explain to women how this feels. The fact that you can have someone who you are no longer intimate with, or maybe don't even particularly have a desire to be intimate with anymore, and yet there's something in your programming that causes you to feel like this sort of guttural pull that something or someone that was once yours now isn't.
Sure. I think if it mattered, I cared a lot less today. That we're 9 years out now, literally, mathematically. It was April 1st, 2013 when she drove away. It's not a thing I think about very much anymore. And I even go so far as to say I like the dude that she's been with for like 5 or 6 years. He's a good guy. I had the experience of her dating somebody I wished would die. And I've never wanted anyone to die before. And I mean that. and I didn't really want him to die so awful. I, I I don't even think that that's true. I just kind of wouldn't mind it if like an accident had befallen him. Right? That was it. But so much of it was about my son. So much of it was about like somebody I calculated to be an awful human being in my son's sphere. And yes, I was offended by the idea that you're talking about, that like this gross person like got to be with her, because that was what I perceived to be relatively soon after the marriage ended. And I think there's an important idea here. For her, she'd probably been done for
She
like
checked out quite a while
12
ago.
to 18 to 24 months. And for me, it was like immediate and right now. And people need to understand that that is like a radically different experience. Once again, it's the orange. I see orange, they see green. It's all of that. But yeah, it's pretty bad. And I think a lot of people probably feel really awful about it when relationships end. And maybe even like a current dating partner that perceives you to like still want your ex because you're, I mean, I've been accused of that early years ago, that, I was dated a couple people that are like, he's still hung up on his ex. And I'm like, really not. I hung up on the idea that I messed up, I feel like, in my relationship, and that it was the single greatest sort of misstep in my life. And by misstep, I really mean millions of them, day in and day out. It was like, what
But
you don't know
also,
can't kill you.
that's an important learning experience, right? Like it's difficult. Maybe again, this is the what do women see, what do men see thing not working. That what you're looking at in retrospect now is a very valuable learning experience, a strategic learning experience from which you hopefully can, again, expedite success and avoid pitfalls. But from perhaps a woman's perspective, looking at you, still ruminating about situations and stuff like that, it's not about logically, rationally, what can you pull out of this situation? It's about, it must be the emotions. It must be that he's still in love with his ex. And you go, well, no, there's a difference. And again, on average, I have tons and tons of female friends that are way, way more logical than some of my guy friends. But my point is that I could see how that would be an interpretation.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So yeah, it was. I wrote about that at the beginning of the book, that I was having a really tough time with thinking about. I mean, I thought about it like every day. It was really awful. I was like sitting around miserable, drinking vodka, just upset, and imagining her doing God knows what with, this person that I thought was awful. And that was the value of it is, I don't believe growth, change, evolution, if you will, occurs until standing pat, until inertia, the pain of inertia. I have to, the discomfort has to be, I can't sit still anymore. Forgive me for not being able to get this out. Change is uncomfortable, but the discomfort from the change is less severe than the discomfort of doing nothing, because this feels so bad. I can't stay like this ever again. And that was the only thing in my life where that had ever been true about, where I'd been motivated to action because it felt, the idea of being stuck, of being still, of not doing anything different was too impossible to imagine. I'm like, I'm not going to subject myself to this identical thing happening again. What's so interesting to me is how I went this way. And then you talked about like, right, the manosphere, like red pill guys. And I'm there who I get like the greatest amount of criticism from. If I have like intellectual critique of my work, it's from them. They believe that I'm advocating like men being effeminate and taking blame. And I promise I'm not. I'm just, we better give a shit about the experiences of someone else. I don't really care who we're with. And I also am not a marriage advocate. Don't get married. Don't date. Don't do anything you don't want to do. But if the mission is a relationship with another human being, I don't care who they are, you better value what they value, the requisite amount, or they're going to choose to not be with you anymore. They're not going to trust you anymore. They're not going to perceive you to be reliable anymore. And then they're going to want to go away. And I don't understand why that is a uncomfortable concept for people. I invite everyone to test that idea out for themselves.
I think it puts a lot of the onus on the guys if you
Certainly
do that,
does.
which is one of the problems. So I had Jeffrey Miller on the show. He was basically the father of the sexual selection, sexual dynamics movement when it comes to evolutionary psychology. So he's the guy that began the red pill movement from an academic standpoint, right? So everybody that's in the manosphere now that is sort of promulgating these ideas, they're quoting Jeffrey's own work back to him. You know, he's the guy that did the studies. And he was writing this in the 90s. And then in 2004, he released a book. And then in 2013, he released another book called Mate with Tucker Max.
I have that book. Yeah.
Yeah. So Jeffrey's the academic rocket power behind that, and Tucker's kind of like the real world stress testing, I guess you could say. And dude, they say in Mate, they're talking about, and I asked him about this, that they spent so much time in the first chapter of Mate explaining to men. This is a book for men, what women want and how to give it to them, something like that. Like the most pick-up artisty title ever, but it's a fantastic book. And in the first chapter of it, they spent like 5 or 10 pages explaining to men what it's like to be a woman in the dating market, like in real graphic detail, like explaining what it feels like to be physically weaker than the people that you're choosing to go out on a date with, and what it feels like to have to tell your girlfriends, if I don't message you by this time, then, you know, here's where I'm going to be, or leave and find my iPhone on, and all of this sort of stuff, just passively, bro. Because again, there is a non-zero number of men out there that are arseholes, and women therefore need to have a particular protection mechanism in place. Yeah. What does it feel like to be judged primarily on your looks, that being the fundamental source of value that you have on the dating market? What does it feel like to be in competition where there is the cash value or the price of sex continues to be degraded because women are increasingly prepared to have sex with less and less commitment from men, because sex has now become decoupled from having babies, and then norms around casual sex has continued to be degraded, and blah, blah, blah. So if you're a woman who wants to wait for a few dates, that means that you're playing a game against the women that don't want to wait for a few dates because he can go and get sex on date 2, but you want to make him wait till date 4. All of these things, pages and pages and pages of these guys explaining it. And I asked Jeffrey about it, and he said, well, yeah, this is the thing that the sort of modern dating movement that's helping men is missing, which is, if you want to be effective in the dating market as a man, maybe spend a nanosecond thinking about what it's like to be a woman. Like, what are you optimizing for here? Are you optimizing for yourself, or are you optimizing for the person that you're trying to attract? And yeah, I can understand why the position that you put across is triggering, or makes men feel, some men in the manosphere feel dissatisfied.
Me too.
Because for them, any advocation that it's not women's fault is unacceptable. Sure. Right? It is almost always about the fact that women are overly hypergamous, that they're gold diggers, that they're prepared to leave the beta to fuck the alpha. Like that's the rubric that just kind of gets thrown at whatever the situation is. And yeah, I think, you know, again, like this is the more hopeful view, man. Like that there are solutions out there, that there are ways to optimize your dating life, to be intentional, to be deliberate, to find somebody that's good for you. That seems far more hopeful.
Yeah, I hope so. And again, I heard everything you just said, and I am sympathetic / empathetic to those guys. But the part that leaves out is personal responsibility for partner selection. I just, that's a non-starter in a conversation with me. If you can't accept responsibility for the person you're going to share space with and share resources with and potentially share children with, I don't know how to have like a conversation about that. That's because that, if it's all women's fault, then it means you bear no responsibility in like who you choose to spend your life with. And I don't understand that.
You said when talking about what constitutes a good life that a better word than happiness might be contentment or peace or balance.
Yeah, maybe.
I think you're right. I think when I try and think about what I optimize my life for, it's peace. I don't try and necessarily optimize it for peak experiences. And this is one of the things that I try and tell my friends. Look, dude, like, there is no value that you can place on your sanity when you have the decision to make between cheating on your girlfriend because there's this like hot chick in a bar or whatever, and then going back. Like, look, if you're going to spend the next 3 weeks turning yourself inside out because you can't believe the person that you were did the thing that you did, there is no, what, £100,000, £200,000? What would you pay to get those 3 weeks of your life back? Remembering that time is something that you're never going to be able to reclaim. You know, you're in the prime of your life and you've spent all of this time obsessing over some terrible situation that you put yourself in.
Yeah.
So optimizing for sanity, for peace, for contentment, for balance, that's what I think people should be moving toward. And then from there, you have the opportunity to build towards something that's better. But that's, you know, you can't put a price on sanity. And I think that that's what we should be protecting as much as we can.
That's an incredibly valuable insight. You know, my experience with that was when my marriage was falling apart and I was sleeping in the guest room for 18 months, or the nights afterward where I'd be up for 2, 3, 4 hours in the middle of the night, just simply unable to sleep, feeling the most miserable I've ever felt. And there's nowhere to hide from it. There's nowhere to run away from it. It comes to work with you and it rides in the car with you and it does all the things. And if there was some economical way to like exchange money to make that stop, I would have absolutely traded financial resources for it. But there isn't. And I think there are probably many, many wealthy people out there that have experienced that have had the 3, 4 hours of being unable to sleep in the middle of the night, of trying to concentrate in a high level executive meeting, but can't think about anything but like the horse show at home. And right, it doesn't matter how many zeros are in their bank account. There's no peace.
Well, that's the thing. Forget, you know, whether it is that we couldn't pay our way out of it, neither can Elon Musk.
That's right.
You know, there isn't a way to fix this. The ultimate cash value of sanity is infinite.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important to think about. And I mean, I'm not perfect. I haven't achieved some incredible state of Zen where I feel good about myself all the time. I don't mean to imply that, but I believe strongly that healthy relationships are huge for providing stability in our lives. And so being mindful of how we might be inadvertently like jeopardizing its integrity, jeopardizing its longevity is a really valuable thought exercise and something to consider and practice new habits for, because that is one of the things that will like just really mess up your life if you value the stability of the marriage and family. I don't want to place my values on other people, but I think most people care about their home life being some sort of oasis from, you know, the shit out in the world.
Matthew Fray, ladies and gentlemen, if people want to keep up to date with what you do online, where should they go?
Thank you. My home on the internet's MatthewFray.com. Just Matthew with 2 T's, Fray, F-R-A-Y. And yeah, I mean, there's every social channel and email address and things like that. If anybody wants to participate in these conversations, to say, oh yeah, that's really great, or you're a moron, I'm open to either conversation, I promise.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you.
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
What's happening, people? Thank you very much for tuning in. If you enjoyed that episode, then press here for a selection of the best clips from the podcast over the last few weeks. And don't forget to subscribe. Peace.